Good morning, streaming audience. Okay. Music up. It's time for Clubhouse Chatter. Here's Norm Ordez.
Hey, that's right. Time for some Clubhouse Chatter at beautiful Erickson Studio up here in wine country in Oregon. And my first guest this morning makes his second appearance on the show, and that would be Jim Campanis. And Jim, how you doing this morning?
I'm great, Norm. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So Jim comes from one of the great baseball families, the Campanis family. And so his father, I will let Jim chat a little bit about the baseball family. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and it goes back. My grandfather, Al Campanis, he immigrated with my great grandmother. Didn't get to America until he was 7 or 8. Didn't speak a word of English, and found baseball and fell in love with it. Ended up being going to New York University and played baseball and football actually. And I had classmates like Henry Kissinger and a number of other notables, like Howard Cosell and people like that. It's pretty interesting at the university at the time. And then and he went on and played for the Dodgers for 1 year and was also instrumental in teaching Jackie Robinson second base. About that time, my dad was born, and then he went on and played with the Dodgers, Royals, and Pirates in the 60s and 70s. And then I came along and went to USC and was picked up by the Mariners in the draft and got to the 40-man roster, but I had kind of one of those injury-riddled little break and miss and snap in that and and just kind of, missed my little window of opportunity, but it was a wonderful run, and I often write about it, and I think that's how you and I hooked up originally. So, it's been in our blood since the beginning, and I have a young one coming up, and he's playing as well.
Yeah, and he's actually pretty decent too, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a musician and a baseball player, and he hit a home run. He's a freshman. He hit a home run about 380 feet a couple weeks ago, and with a wooden bat.
Wow.
I wasn't able to do that at 15. Even we were using those juiced-up Eastons back then,
Right. So now, and you were right about you and I connecting, and I mean, you have some great stories, and and that's why I love having you on, and not only talking about your stories, your experience at SC and with the Mariners, but your family. I mean, your grandpa and your dad. And the last time we had talked, you had chatted a little bit about your grandfather and Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
And so what's the story there?
Well, it's just funny. At the time, Cuba was a hotbed for baseball. In fact, they had a AAA team during the season. But during the winter time, my grandpa would go down to make extra dollars, and he would manage a team while he was also scouting the amateur leagues that were around Havana. And he kept running into this pitcher who didn't throw really hard, but he had a really good curveball. And he was making a recommendation to sign this player as a pitcher, but not give him much money. Just try to get him into a uniform. Maybe he'll develop a better fastball or learn how to throw a sinker. And that was Fidel Castro. And according to my grandpa, he was kind of like a marginal, possible player that he had pegged for maybe AA or AAA, but nonetheless, he had a good arm and a good, and it was a good pitcher. But could you imagine had he signed him, things would have been a little bit different down in that part of the world, So.
Oh, definitely. And you had also mentioned your grandfather working with Jackie Robinson.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that it was funny because, and I think you and I talked about this, but I was flipping through the channels, and there's a show called History Detectives on TBS, and it happened to highlight a team Jackie Robinson started as a barnstorming, team in the winter. And there were other barnstorming teams, but they would be all one race. So there was one that was like, what's his name? The Cleveland pitcher. Anyway,
Satchel Paige.
Bob Feller, yeah. And so Bob Feller had a team of all white guys and played against Satchel Paige's team of all African-American guys. Well, Jackie had what is now known as the first integrated team, and my grandpa was the shortstop. And I learned about this on this TV program. But that was the year after that was the year that Jackie and my grandpa had teamed up in Montreal, and basically Branch Rickey had requested my grandpa play one more year, which he didn't feel like he was good enough, but they're getting too old. But Branch said, look, I just really want you to teach Jackie how to play second base. You're a shortstop. He came from playing outfield and a little bit of short, but has never played second. We have Pee Wee Reese in Brooklyn, so we need him to play second. And so that was my grandpa's job for the 1945 season. And Jackie turned into a pretty good player.
Yeah, he did. So now let's chat a little bit about your dad, and tell us a little bit about your dad.
Well, he was a pre-draft guy, so he was offered a number of contracts by different teams out of high school. Went to Fullerton High School out here in Orange County, and eventually a Dodger scout, and this was one of those weird things where my grandpa had to sort of deal with a little nepotism. But the other scouts convinced him to sign my dad when he really didn't want him to be a Dodger for $25,000, which is about $150,000 in today's money, And he ultimately was signed by the Dodgers, went off and played in rookie ball right off the bat, and was having great years. And there was like a log jam for catchers at the time. There was Jeff Torborg and Roseboro and Haller and a couple of other guys. And so the Angels called when my dad was supposed to be in AAA and said, hey, we need a catcher really bad. And so they loaned, and I've never heard of this before or since, but they loaned my dad a Dodger, property to the AAA Seattle Pilots that had Jay Johnstone and Bob Lemon was a manager. And my dad actually ended up beating the Dodgers AAA team for the championship that year. And it really helped him because it gave him an opportunity to play every single day where he was getting a lot of platooning. But that's really what helped get him into the majors. And the second that my grandpa got the job as general manager, within 15 minutes he had already sold my dad off to Kansas City for $100,000 and 2 minor league players. So he didn't want the nepotism when he got the big job, the big call finally. He did not want any of that, interfering or any of the writers to pick up on that. So he just eliminated that. But again, my dad got a chance to play. He was in a platooning role with Ellie Rodriguez when he went to Kansas City, which was a wonderful thing. So, it all kind of worked out. And then ultimately my dad was traded for, my dad's a big dude. He was traded for little Freddie Patek to go from the Royals over to the Pirates. And the Pirates was another situation where it was really stacked. They had Manny Sanguillen and Ed Ott and a bunch of other catchers, but he was able to stick around there for a couple of years, and he played until I think he was 33. He had a good career, played 15 years, and, has a number of relationships still with guys from back then. He plays golf with them. He's on Facebook with them, and they go to his golf tournaments and all that. So he had a good run. Nice.
Ed Ott. Ed Ott has the shortest name ever in Major League Baseball history. Did you know that?
I didn't, but he was a fun guy. I remember him even as a kid. My dad used to bring home a uniform every year, and my mom was good at sewing, and so she would cut the uniform down to fit me. And I would go with my dad every day and catch fly balls in the outfield and go in the bullpen and watch the pitchers and I was always a cool guy and like to, I was 5 or 6 or 7 maybe, and he would hang out with me and talk to me and, teach me stuff. And all the while I'm catching fly balls from major leaguers at 5, 6. I mean, it was a tremendous head start for me when I started playing to have that experience.
Right. And so your grandpa Al, he kind of got a bum deal.
Yeah.
As general manager of the Dodgers, and explain a little bit about that.
Well, I think the one thing, and in fact, I had just to say the story real quick, and then I'll give you some recent updates. But he went on Nightline to talk about his friendship and the legacy of Jackie Robinson, and when asked why there aren't very many major league managers and general managers of African American descent, my grandpa, I think, decided he was going to defend the institution of baseball versus provide his own personal views. And he said some things that were construed as, racist, but even though here's a guy who, played with Jackie Robinson, roomed with him in the 40s when this was unheard of. He's an immigrant himself. He broke many barriers, especially in the Dominican as well, in his career, bringing a lot of those players down. But ultimately, it cost him his job, and the public outcry. It was too much for him to deal with. So he technically resigned. Although it's always said he was fired, he wrote a letter to the O'Malleys and said that he didn't want the distraction of his comments to hamper the team, and he left. We've heard about this Donald Sterling thing recently, and I got a call from the guy who was the producer of that show, that Nightline show, who was also on an ESPN segment. He called me the other day and spoke with me, just almost super irritated, and I almost had I had to calm him down a little bit because he was just ranting and raving about these lazy journalists who were comparing Donald Sterling to my grandpa. And he said the only thing that is comparable was that there was this public outcry, sure, but the way that these two people, conducted their lives and the way that these two guys, their beliefs and so on couldn't have been further apart. And his name is Mr. Harris, and Mr. Harris wrote a really a rebuttal back to the guy who wrote this article in Minnesota in the Minneapolis paper, and it was published. And the writer, ultimately said, I understand your point, and I think it's justified. And so, to this day, it's 7 years or so later, we're still kind of dealing with, the aftermath of what my grandfather said and the legacy that became of it. And we're getting people now to realize he wasn't necessarily a racist or any of that. He was just defending baseball. But again, every time someone says something stupid in terms of race, it seems to always find a way to come back to my grandpa, and we're trying to alleviate that misconception. And that's one of the other reasons that I like to write these stories, is to get some disinformation that's out there squashed,
Right. Well, I definitely, and we at 980 Know-It-All repost some of your stories from time to time. And, some of them are hilarious. You talk about your USC days, and you talk about playing with Barry White's boy,
right,
which I think is hysterical. And, there's a story about a baseball card that has you and Brad Asmus on it, who is the Detroit Tigers manager, and tell us about that card.
Well, it came out in 1992, and I know the guy in the bottom right corner too. So it was a four-player card, and it was the top minor league prospect for catchers, And so Brad's in the upper left, I'm in the upper right. My old friend Doug Robbins is in the bottom right, and then the guy who was a catcher for a while but ended up playing, I think, more first was Dave Nielsen for the Brewers. And so Osmus and I ran into each other a few years after that, and he and I had played against each other in the minors and got to know each other well. And And plus, we were catchers, so we were in the catchers union. You know, we paid our dues, so we're on this union. We always have this joke, but he kind of made a comment like, "Hey, how about this? The first guy to get the card to sign it, just allow it. He can go ahead and put a little swash across the other guy's face." And I'm like, "All right, we'll do that." So yeah, it's funny because people send me these cards, and if Brad got it first, he extends his S at the end, like right across my face, you know, right on the right side. And then if I get it first, I swoop my J, you know, on my name, right across his neck, you know, make sure I get it nice and thick over there. And I did. It's just funny because, like I said, a card came out 20-some years ago, and we're still doing it, you know.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious. You know, and it's stories like that about baseball that I love, you know, and you know, you talk about, you know, playing at SC, and you know, lately you've been talking about Dave Lattimore. A lot about him.
Dave Ladder. Yeah.
Right, and you know, you've been posting a lot about.
He's one of those guys who you know, was a good player. He was a pitcher, primarily a relief pitcher. But he had this, and he's one of the reasons baseball is so wonderful. He had this instilled in us. I talked to him last night. He has this wonderful personality, and he's a great guy for your team because he's a go-getter, he's a hard worker. But he's also the guy who can really lighten up a moment when things get a little tense or things get a little dreary, a little depressing, or what have you. And he's also one to laugh at himself, and that was the thing where we would sometimes get a little too serious about ourselves and our careers and our egos. And Dave was just fantastic and famous for either using his wit to make fun of you a little bit and you laugh as well, or he would make fun of himself and we would all laugh. And those were the kind of characters that made playing baseball special. And for Dave, it was great because he didn't really get a lot of attention as a junior, and then as a senior, we were scouts with a guy named Mike Scoba. Mike was the former coach at Fullerton Junior College, and I was working out with my dad and Charlie Huff one day. We were just taking batting practice at Santa Ana College, and he happened to be there to watch some other kids performing. And he said, "Hey, you guys know any pitchers? We're looking to get some pitchers in the draft." And I'm like, "Yeah, Dave Ladder." And my dad's like, "Oh, he's got the best slider you'll ever see." And they drafted him in the 33rd round without really seeing a whole lot of him. And Dave went on and had a better career in pro ball than he did in the minors. And he played with guys in the A's organization that, you know, you see a lot of these guys. You know, it was just before or just after the McGwire era, and actually he set the record for most appearances in Double-A in Huntsville, and was up against McGwire, Canseco, Ozzie Canseco, and him were on the ballot for the Hall of Fame for Huntsville, and so ultimately that was you know, it still is one of my best buddies, and again, it's a personality. It was so infectious that it made playing baseball a lot more fun when Dave Ladder was on your team.
Very cool. Well, Jim, we thank you for coming on the show today, and we'd love, you know, the invite is there's always open for you if you ever want to chat with us.
Sure.
You know, love having you on. Love talking about, you know, what you're doing and the history of the, you know, your family and what they've done for baseball. And like I said, it's always great talking to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Norman. I'd love coming on your show anytime you have an open spot. Feel free to give me a jingle, and it's on. Sounds good.
All right, Jim. Hey, you have a great rest of the weekend.
Hey, thanks a lot. You too.
All right. Bye. So there you go, Jim Campanis Jr. Always a great chat there, Brian. He's got some funny stories. We're gonna have to hit him up here soon again. I'd like to thank our sponsors, 90 Know It All. So MDM Designs does our shirts. Mark Canham over there. I'd like to thank Mitch Canham, his son over at Base by Pros. I'd like to thank Baseball Dudes. And speaking of Baseball Dude, I'll be having the head dude of Baseball Dudes coming up next, Chris Gazelle. And Baseballism. Go to baseballism.com, order some stuff, type in Clubhouse Chatter, and just like that, you save 15% on their swag. And they just opened up a new store in Cooperstown, New York. So right there in front of Doubleday Field. Also, Proper Cuts Barbershop on Baker. Go see Carlos and boys. I have a hard time saying that one. I don't know why. But go see Carlos. Tell him that Norm sent you from Clubhouse Chatter. And you possibly could save $1 or $2. And heck, you might even throw in a free haircut. You never know with Carlos. So once again, we'll be back. And thank you for watching.